Hey YouTube fans, today I want to share with you the easiest possible homemade cider recipe. So easy, it's unofficially called prison cider. It is a very simple method, it's very successful, has a low risk of contamination, need almost no equipment. I mean, technically no equipment. And what it is it's basically just fermented apple juice from the store. So these are just cheap apple juice from the grocery store. I do try to, pure juice only. So no, depending on your labeling, you want, pure juice, not an apple drink. So this is basically reconstituted apple juice from concentrate. It has some vitamin C added. None of that matters to the fermentation or the final product. It has been pasteurized. You certainly can ferment pasteurized apple juice. And it's very easy. And the key to this method is we are making it in the container from whence it came. That saves us from A, having a carboy or something else with a fermentation lock, and B, it saves transfers, it saves opportunities for contamination. So when you think about it, this is, being put in here at the factory. It's sterile inside. It's all sterile. And what we're going to do is very quickly take the lid off and pitch yeast and close it back up. And these aren't really, pressure vessels like a 2-liter soda bottle, but they can hold the pressure, and we're going to leave the lid on really loose, and it's a really easy method. Now I'm going to try, I happen to have like this is a commercial brewing yeast for red wine, but I've done it with bread yeast before. So what we're doing here is a side-by-side, semi trying to do a good job, and, dirt bag easy as you can possibly do it. And what we're going to do is, it's a nice warm day today. The weather here in the end of June is about, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 25 Celsius. It's a hot time, so this is going to go pretty quick. We're going to ferment the bulk of the sugar out at room temperature right here, right where it sits basically, to get that fermentation going nice and quick. And then before the fermentation stops, we're going to shove it in the fridge and crash the temperature down. Try to stop the fermentation, but also if we want a nice carbonated cider at the end, the cold temperature of the refrigerator will make carbon dioxide much more soluble. And because the fermentation is basically halting or completing in the fridge, we'll get a very carbonated product, even at atmospheric pressure. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pitch the yeast into both of these containers, and that's it. And then we'll come back tomorrow and see how things are going. All right, so I'm going to be a little careful about my hygiene. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean off this. I'm going to be reasonably careful, but not too careful on purpose. I want to show you this is a surefire, pretty easy way. Okay, so I'm using quite a bit of yeast. I would say that's about half a teaspoon. I want to overwhelm the contaminants and get through the fermentation really quick. Okay, so I'm opening this for the first time. I'm going to not put the cap down and get it dirty, and I'm just pouring in the baker's yeast. Okay, so I'm going to tighten that down, all the way, and back maybe a half. Okay, and then it's holding pressure a little, but if it wanted to leak, it could. It's not going to blow up. Okay, that's the baker's yeast version, and I'm gonna better label this. The shortest pencil is longer than the longest memory. So I'm gonna call this baker's yeast, and I'm writing down June 29th. Okay, next one is going to be the semi-pro yeast. I've certainly used both of these. I think the bread yeast ends up being a little bready, if you can imagine. All right, so this is real yeast, June 29th. June 29th. Okay, that's the method. That's step one. Let's make sure I haven't gone all the way down, back it off, kind of half a turn. Okay, so now we come back tomorrow. Okay, it's 24 hours later. Everything is fermenting very well. It's going quite quickly. I'm hoping you can hear that squealing. The squealing is the CO2 escaping. Let's get in there. Let's get it right in there. So the bubbles, the bubbling action is, obviously indicating a lot of fermentation's happening. There's venting happening through the cap. That's key. This thing would blow up like a bomb, I'm sure, if you tighten this down. So this is on loosely. I'm gonna loosen it here. Okay, you can see the pressure is being released. We don't really need a fermentation lock at this point. You have to exclude, you can't let alcohol get in here because A, it'll taste terrible, but B, you're going to interfere with proper fermentation, and you're going to lead down, that vinegar pathway. So it's important to keep air out, but the flow of gas, the natural flow, it's all kind of flowing out through the tiny gap under the cap. So that keeps atmosphere from getting in, and it works well enough during this active fermentation stage. Both are going really well. I would say probably the baker's yeast is going a little faster at this point. It's probably, bred to be fast. So the trick is to try to get through fermentation, most of fermentation quickly. In the nice warm weather, that's easy. But we want to try to get a sense of when the fermentation kind of peaks and starts to slow down. That's when we want to put it in the fridge. And that's really the only tricky part in this process, is kind of knowing when to slam the brakes on. But it's not today, and we'll try again tomorrow. Okay, day two. Day two in the morning. It's been about, let's say, something like 36, 40 hours since I pitched these. And I'm seeing real signs of slowing fermentation. The rate of bubbling is kind of maxed out and slowing down. So the bulk of fermentation is basically done. So what I'm going to do now with these is throw them in the refrigerator. The temperature will drop, the fermentation will slow, and the yeast will settle out, and I'm going to drink this stuff. So yeah, at this point they go in the fridge. So it didn't even get to 2 days. If you let this step go too long, it just dries out more than I want. I like a little residual sweetness, so I'm trying to slam the brakes on before we get to totally complete fermentation. Okay, we're back and it's been a week. These have been in the refrigerator for 1 week. And you can see that the, first of all, there is still fermentation going at a very slower rate. And almost all of the yeast, it's almost clarified, and almost all of the yeast has settled on the bottom of the jug. And these are perfectly drinkable right now. If you leave them longer, they will clarify even more. You can even, I mean, really, you can drink them when they're not clear. It's not going to hurt you. So I guess the question here is, the question on everybody's mind is, what's the alcohol content? So given the label that the bottle is sold with, we can calculate the gravity, when it's sold. And I'm going to get my hydrometer, and we're going to take some gravity measurements. We're going to be able to calculate quite accurately how much alcohol is in here. Okay, for science, we're checking that water measures 1.00. All right, so right on the label there, we see this is 27 grams of sugar per 250 milliliters, so that's 108 grams per liter. And then you go online, you run a calculator, and you find out that's a potential alcohol of 5.47%. So in other words, if all this sugar is converted to alcohol, it's 5.47. Now it's not there, I'm sure, but we're going to check the gravity and see. And this little gravitometer here has a potential alcohol scale. So 5.47 potential alcohol would be floating sort of there in the unfermented juice. And now we're going to take the measurement, you subtract, and that's how much alcohol you got in there. So first we're going to do this real commercial wine yeast. And we need almost this whole tube. Yep. You can see the bubbles, it's quite carbonated. I didn't really expect that to happen, but if you cool the fermenting juice, it carbonates. Whoa, it's pretty dry. Where she stops, no one knows. Okay, well, so it's coming in at, so it's reading a potential alcohol of about 1. Whoa, so pretty dry, but not bone dry. And around 4.5% alcohol. So now the taste test here. Man, that is pretty good. So that sort of dried out a little more than hang on. Okay, that is a pretty nice cider, I have to say. Try to get some other comments, but first we're gonna try the brewer's yeast. I gotta clean this out. All right, now real prison cider, brewer's yeast and apple juice. In a tall glass. Where she stops, no one knows. Well, it's very similar. It looks like it's slightly drier. So this is coming in, well, just a hair. You don't know. Sometimes it's sticking to the sides. And the other problem is it's kind of getting bubbles stuck to it, so the reading is changing. Well, it's around 1. So it's the similar to the other one. So the yeasts progressed at a similar rate. And this is about 4.5% alcohol as well. And so now, the taste test. Well, it is extremely similar. I would say the real yeast had slightly more sour to it. This one is pretty good. I mean, it's not a, this is not an English traditional cider, clearly. But I mean, it is a, it's not sweet, it has a little bit of tartness. Similarly carbonated, which I would say basically slightly less carbonated than a bottled beer. And quite drinkable, quite easy. So that's kind of the whole process. That's about a week. You could do it in a week from start to finish.